Com. In this video, I'm going to discuss Lightroom versus Photoshop. It's a question I get asked fairly often, and what I think is actually going on out there in the world is a fair number of people learn that they need to use Lightroom, and they use it, and they can't really ever figure out why they're using it, but everybody else says they should, so they do. And then later they figure out that all they really needed was Photoshop for their work. And so hopefully this video will clarify when you might choose one or the other, or use both, and also some tips on when you're using Lightroom or Photoshop that relate. So let's first go over how do each of these programs work, because they take fundamentally different approaches to what you're going to do. I've got Lightroom open here, and I'm just going to cancel out of that to show you that Lightroom's basic model is to create what's called a catalog, and then you're going to import, clicking this import button, and it's going to say, what do you want to import? So I'll select this folder, and I've got, I don't know, 3,000 images in here for my trip. You know, this is not real fast. And in fact, if I imported this folder, it'll start showing a few of them here soon, I hope. If I imported this folder, it'll probably take 5 or 6 hours to import them and generate previews and so on. That's overhead I do not need in my day or my work, and actually offers no value at all, and the previews aren't good enough for what I want to do, and so on. So I'm completely wasting my time doing that. And I haven't imported here. This is just like rough previews, so it'll take a very long time if I actually hit the import button here. So basically all these files are going to be processed, turned into JPEGs, stored as previews, and the idea is that you have this huge catalog where each of these files shows up, and you can then go pick and choose what you want to do. You can organize them, you can add keywords, and various things like that. And for some photographers, that's great. The overhead is worth it. For other photographers, it's just completely wasted time, and I put myself in that category. Now, if 20 years from now, I've got time on my hands, and I'm retired, and I want to go through all the photos ever taken, organize them all by place, Yosemite, White Mountains, desert, whatever, and I want family, and then I want to subcategorize those by names of my daughters, my parents, and so on. Well, I can go into Lightroom and I can add keywords to all these, and I can spend hours and hours doing that sort of thing. And if that's your thing, that's great. However, that is not what I need for my work. So let's go to Photoshop, and I've actually got it open here. I'm going to escape out of that to show you where I'm starting there. In the Finder, come on Finder, there we go. Here I've got a folder of stuff open, like I don't know, some large number of files. I'm just going to double click them, 125 items there. There's just a few of the trip shots I have. And what's going to happen there is Photoshop is bring up the Adobe Camera Raw dialog. So unlike what's going on in Lightroom, this is not going to get imported into a catalog. I can click on any given image, and then I can apply settings to it, and then I can open that image. Now for my work, in a lot of cases, I'll be shooting panoramas, focus stacks, things like that. You can see, like, here's a panorama, it's a bank, 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 bank. So how does Lightroom help me with that? Well, not at all, because the only thing I need to do with this panorama is I need to put them in a folder, and then I need to process them, and then I need to assemble them into a panorama. And it's true that you could probably do some of those things in Lightroom, but by the time you get to focus stacks, aperture series, and show-ons, I don't want to keyword and add metadata to this stuff. These are complex tasks to perform that have to be done in either an external program like Serene Stacker or Photoshop, and there's always something else to be done, and so on. So, and I'm not going to really work this way either. Let me cancel out of that. And show you what really happens. So here's a Here's a folder I've created. It's got 7 frames in it. It's a focus stack. Do I need that in Lightroom? I mean, what would it do for me? Besides, what I need to do is stack this with Xerine Stacker. So if I double click these files, I've now got all the files in the series. I'm going to apply some settings to them. And then, as I've shown in other videos, I'm going to export these as TIFF. And then those are going to get processed as Xerine Stacker. And maybe I'll do some retouching. And then I'm going to want to layer these in Photoshop, which Lightroom doesn't have, so I can't layer them in Lightroom at all. So why would I waste any time in Lightroom doing this sort of thing? I wouldn't. So my work involves focus stacks like this, or aperture series, or panoramas, and it doesn't really revolve around, like a whole bunch of family photos or a wedding shoot or something like that. So, the best part of it is when I want to work on these 7 files, I'll just work on those. I didn't just have to wait 5 or 10 hours for Lightroom to import 3,000 100 megapixel files and generate a 23 gigabyte catalog with previews, most of which I may never use, and so on. So for me at least, there's a very simple equation. If I have to sit down and wait for hours and waste the disk space, it's just a non-starter. And then I'm not going to keyword them because that has no value to me, and I'm not going to do much of anything in Lightroom. So it's, for my work done, it offers no value. Let's sort of pause here and say, it's like everything else in life. There's a best tool for the job. If I have a hammer and a screwdriver, I'm going to pound nails with a hammer, and I'm going to screw screws with a hammer. I think I might have tried to pound a nail with a screwdriver once, but it didn't work so well. If you got nails, pick the hammer. So that's all that's going on with Lightroom versus Photoshop. I consider Lightroom too high in overhead for my work, and I just don't have any real benefit from it. And to that point, did I mention layers? I have to use layers all the time. So even if I want to do something simple like these 7 frames, I'm just going to open these guys. It'll take a second. So I'm going to focus stack these ultimately, but for now, let me just open them. And how in heck can I actually compare these effectively? I want to compare near to far, the focus. If these weren't a stack, you might want to compare, is this shot sharper than that shot? There are certain ways to do certain things like that. They appeared on the other screen, sorry. Let me stack them. So here I've stacked all these images, and in Photoshop I can layer them. That's a subject of another video, and you can see here they all are in this layer. So if I want to go through and assess the focus, you can see this one's focused very closely, and that last one, it's got the far distance focus. This is the ridge up Mount Canas here, by the way. You go up here, this knife edge ridge to the summit back here. And this is actually very useful in, like, here's a middle area, which one's sharpest there. When I go to actually retouch in a focus stack, I often need to know which image is sharpest. By doing layers, I can just click on and off. Like here's the last one versus the first one. That's extremely helpful. There's no way you can do that so conveniently in Lightroom. So right away, I want a layered set of images in Photoshop. So, and I have many uses for layers, which Lightroom doesn't have. So why would I spend my time in Lightroom? I won't. It's just a completely useless thing. I'd have to export the images and then do everything I do in Photoshop. So it just doesn't work for my workflow. And on the same token, if you're using another RAW converter like, say, Capture One Pro, it has its own catalog concepts and similar things. That's very akin to Lightroom. And again, it just doesn't work for my workflow. All right, so in summary, Lightroom just ends up being a lot of extra work while contributing really no value to what I ultimately need to get done. You may be a project-based photographer, say doing weddings, and in that case, your work may be very different. You're probably not doing focus stacks or panoramas. You probably got individual photos. You might need to name them. For your clients, you might need to batch export a bunch of photographs. There's certain things you have to produce that a sort of organizer program like that is very valuable for. Now, on the kind of bad notes, I've actually had consulting clients who've needed several days of work to clean up their Lightroom catalogs. It got to be such a mess, and because Lightroom sort of hides things and you don't know where things go, they didn't even know where their files were. Literally did not know where their files were. So as soon as you adopt a program, you're hitching your wagon to it, and you'd better know how it's actually working under the covers, or the day could come where that program no longer exists, or you don't want to use it, and now it's organized in some hidden place by its own, inscrutable standards that you can't figure out, or you got duplicates, or it's lost the files. It just can become a huge mess. In my opinion, let me close this out. I'm going to go back to the Finder. This is how I organize my work. You'll see if I go up a level. These are the folders I created, make these a little bigger, during a recent 1-month trip. I do everything date and then place. And within that, there'll be a bunch of subfolders. Now, why do I do it that way? Well, because 50 years from now, if I'm still alive, probably won't be, I can look at these by date, and I can look at these by keyword, and I can spotlight search for Dana, Canyon, and I've got something to go on. Okay, now if you're in Lightroom, that's all, and you're no longer using Lightroom, that's toast. Instead, it's like gobbledygook here and gobbledygook there. You have absolutely nothing you can actually go back to and actually just look at and figure out. So even if you're a Lightroom user, I strongly recommend you adopt some organizational folder-based format like this before you import the stuff into Lightroom. Before you do it. And you tell Lightroom, don't move, don't copy, just import the stuff. Now you've got an organized thing on disk that you can understand, not something someone else invented, and you can still use Lightroom or Photoshop or anything else. So that's how I would recommend you organize your stuff. And same for other raw converters like Phase 1 Capture One Pro, outstanding program. But again, I would organize by folders and not allow it to dump things in strange places and give it strange names that don't make any sense to you. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's kind of my take on Lightroom versus Photoshop. I consider them both excellent programs, but it's like the same, if I'm going to buy a car and I'm going to commute to work, a nice economo car like a Volkswagen Jetta, that's terrific. If I need to haul bales of straw, I'm going to buy a pickup truck. They're just different things. So think about how you shoot and what you want to do, and then choose the program accordingly. I would suggest starting with Photoshop, because there are things you can do in that you just can't really do in Lightroom, or you certainly can't do layers in any meaningful way. And you can always add Lightroom on top of that. You can always use Lightroom to organize things, but you can't use Lightroom to do Photoshop things. So invest your time and efforts into Photoshop, and then add Lightroom as an adjunct. And that's, I believe, the best way to think about it.